Good evening from the White House. I'm Kelly Wright. Thanks for joining me as we spend this next hour together. As always, I do sincerely hope that you're safe and well, taking care of yourself and your family because you matter. My opening observations tonight, moving forward. How do we as a nation move forward in the midst of a COVID-19 pandemic that is pulling us downward in terms of disrupting our health and our overall economy? Well, we're here today to talk to the President of the United States briefly about his plans for improving the economy as well as reopening schools and making sure that we can do it safely and effectively so that all Americans benefit from that. Now, keep in mind that we're in the midst of an election year, and as a result of that, especially fresh on the heels of former Vice President Joe Biden announcing that Senator Kamala Harris will be his running mate, there is a lot of debate going on politically. But culturally, there's also a lot of debate. Racially, there's a divide. What does the President of the United States have to say about all of that? We talked to him about it in terms of moving forward and keeping this nation on a trajectory of rising upward and not downward. Let's face it, no matter what side of the aisle we're on, whether it's left or right, conservative or liberal, Republican or Democrat, or even independent, we must stand together in dealing with this COVID-19 and everything else that comes against us as a nation. One fundamental thing about being in the United States of America is that we must be united, because divided will fall. And those are my opening observations. And now, my interview with President Donald Trump. Mr. President, I want to thank you for being on the program tonight. And as you know, the United States has been hit very hard with this COVID-19 pandemic. It's disrupted our lives in so many different sectors, particularly our economy. As you move to reopen states, what's your focus on strengthening our economy so that all Americans can benefit from your plan?
Right, so most states are doing very well. Now Florida's heading really in a good direction. California likewise, and Texas, those were the three that got hit very hard more recently. They were doing great and then they got hit. But the whole world has been hit very hard. I see where Germany now has got a big surge, and France and Spain and everybody. It's just a terrible, terrible thing all over the world. But we've done a very good job, and we've got it, I think, in very good shape. And we have vaccines coming and therapeutics coming, and the economy is starting to open, and it's opening up at a level that nobody thought possible. It's a definite V, meaning the best. And we set a jobs record for the last 3 months. And when you combine them, it's the most people ever hired during a period of a 3 month, like a quarterly period. It's been incredible what's happening. The markets are high. NASDAQ is at the all-time high. The rest, in fact, the market's up a few hundred points today already. And that's only because these are smart people. And you have the Biden overhang, by the way. The reason it would be up even more, except you have the Biden overhang, because if Biden never got in, the markets would crash, and they know that. So that's where the risk is. That's where the primary risk is, because he'd raise everybody's taxes, which he intends to do fully. I mean, he intends to do. The radical left intends to do. He's just a puppet. But he'd raise everybody's taxes, and so many other bad things. His Green New Deal is a disaster. It's actually a cartoon joke, because it doesn't even come close to working. So destroy our economy. But between regulations and taxes, he's going to double, triple, and quadruple people's taxes. He's going to drive companies out of this country. The whole thing is so preposterous. So there go the jobs, there go the 401ks. And we, on the other hand, we're setting records right now. We're going to have an incredible third quarter. We're going to have an incredible next year. I think next year is going to be better than last year. And last year we broke every record.
You know, that's something that a lot of people are talking about. What about your concerns for the underserved community, those communities that are marginalized, like the African Americans and Hispanic and Native Americans, particularly the Black community? What would you say to them about improving their economy through opportunity zones and other programs?
Well, it's a very good question and very important to me. You know that. You've known me a long time. We've known each other a long time. We've done the opportunity zones. We've done criminal justice reform, which nobody could have done. I saved the historically black colleges and universities. If you look at that, we gave them long-term as opposed to short-term, and we gave them more money than they were even seeking, and have done a lot. But most importantly, we're bringing them back to where we were. Just before the virus came in from China, The black community had the best unemployment and employment numbers. They vary the way you look at them, depending on which chart. But the black community had the best unemployment and employment numbers in the history of our country. Hispanic likewise, Asian likewise, women likewise. Everybody, every group, every high school group, if you didn't graduate, if you did graduate, if you got a diploma, if you didn't get a diploma, every group. But the African American community had the best employment numbers in the history of our country. And I want to bring it back there. And by the way, they had a tremendous month last month. You saw it went up a point, and it was up in a positive sense. And we will be back there very soon, because they had the best numbers in the history of our country. And then we got hit with the China virus. But we'll be back very soon. The way we're going right now, we'll be back very, very soon.
We'll be back with more of my interview with the President of the United States right after this. What are your concerns when it comes to COVID-19 and the fact that the pandemic has hurt us in terms of getting back to schools? A lot of states are still concerned, or parents and teachers are concerned about what will happen to their students in going back to schools. You're pushing to reopen the schools. Is that going to be successful, or should we do it virtually?
No, I think we should reopen the schools. Young children have a very strong immune system, even stronger than us, I have to say. I have to admit it. But they do tremendously well, and we have to open our schools. We have opened many of our businesses. That's why the numbers are so good. The economic numbers are so good. And people want our schools open. You have to do it. At some point, you have to do this. We're very close to the vaccine, and we're very close therapeutically to having something that, to me, is even more important than the vaccine, because it makes people well. But we have to get going, and we have to open our schools.
In doing that, the transmission rate, as some students are now rising in the numbers of COVID cases, I think the last report was 100,000 children. Are you at all concerned about that?
No, because they don't get sick. They don't get very sick. If you're elderly, if you have bad heart problems and diabetes problems, that's one thing. But children can get sniffles, or they'll get something, but they don't get, if you look at the mortality rate is almost non-existent for young people. It's an amazing thing, but it's almost non-existent in young people, which is, again, having to do with a system that's a little bit different than people that are older. We want to be very careful with our nursing homes, very careful with people over a certain age. We have to be very, very careful, especially if those people have heart problems or diabetes problems.
A lot of black Americans are concerned about school choice. Is that something you will continue to push so that people in black communities have choice?
School choice is one of my biggest issues, and we've come a long way in it, and we'll get it done this term when we have it. And that gives independence and freedom. That gives so many different things. It's such an advantage, and more than anybody else, the black community wants that, because they'll take their child out of a lousy school, a public school that's doing a terrible job, and they can put the child into a good school and a good school system. School choice, and yet Biden is totally against it, and his new person, Kamala Harris, is totally against that, because they'll do anything the teachers union tells them. And you have such bad schools, and I think it's one of the biggest problems for the black community. Their kids are forced to go into bad schools, and we're very close to getting school choice.
In addition to that, there's also crime that you've talked about. You've talked about sending federal troops into Chicago and other places to quell the violence that goes on in the streets there. Having stated that, would it be possible to possibly talk to mentoring groups and groups that are out there in front of trying to turn the curve around, like Cure Violence, which sees violence as a public health epidemic, and they're sending violence interrupters in to challenge that and try to quell violence and bring peace?
Right, it's a good question, and I do meet with those groups, but you're also talking with some hardcore anarchists. Like if you look at Portland in particular, and it's really a different problem than Chicago, but if you look at Portland, that's anarchist agitators at the highest level, and we've handled that very tough. Now, we'd like to go in and clean it out, but that's up to the state to ask us. But, it's interesting, whether it's Chicago or New York, which has such horrible problems, they can actually do it themselves. Chicago has 25,000 police officers, and they're really good. but they're not allowed to do their job. New York has New York's finest. It's got thousands of incredible people, but they're not allowed to do their job. They're afraid to do anything. They don't want to lose their job. They don't want to, well, although a lot of them are leaving, if you want to know the truth, it's terrible. But they don't want to lose their pensions. They don't want to lose everything because they spoke improperly to somebody. The police aren't allowed to do their jobs. Now, we'll go in and clean it up in 24 hours. We did it in Minneapolis. If you look at what happened there, after days and days of burning, we went in and cleaned it up. But the police have to be allowed to do their job, and they haven't been allowed to do their job.
Mr. President, how do we heal our country? With the racial divide, what would be your word to heal?
Success heals our country, and we were there. And then China blew it. China sent that virus, whether they sent it or it came by accident or incompetence. Success cures our... We were there. I was starting to get along with Democrats that nobody spoke to. I was starting to get along with people. We had the best employment numbers, the best everything, the best stock markets. We were there. Again, job numbers for every community, including minority communities, everybody else. Everybody was doing great. And then the pandemic came to us. The plague came to us from China. And I'm telling you, we were there. Success will bring everybody together. That's jobs and everything else.
Mr. President, I want to thank you for being on the program.
Thank you.
And for your maiden appearance on the Black News Channel.
I'm very greatly honored. I love it. We'll do it again.
I look forward to it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Welcome back to the program. So joining me now, I'm delighted to introduce to you, known by many, Dr. Avis Jones-DeWeaver, political analyst, as well as another guest for the show, Erica Savage Wilson. And she has the Politics Podcast, the Savage Politics Podcast, and they're joining me now on this program. So ladies, I just finished interviewing the President of the United States. He was not in support of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. I want to know your take and your opinion of Senator Kamala Harris being the choice for former Vice President Joe Biden to run in his running mate, because it's so historical. Avis? It
is, and I'm like completely thrilled. You can barely wipe the smile off my face today. It's wonderful to see. It's wonderful to see not only because it is a historic pick, absolutely it's a historic pick, but it's wonderful to see because she deserved it, because she was the best person for the job. And we're finally, at least in this specific situation, we can say that this is a moment where her being a Black woman did not stand in the way of her getting her just desserts in terms of what she has professionally earned. She has the ability to step into that role. She has the ability to be president from day one if the worst happens. And so I'm glad that he made what I believe to be the right selection, and I believe also the selection that's going to energize the base, that's going to allow them to be led to victory in November.
Eric, what about you?
Yeah, about 4:17 yesterday, I started smiling really, really hard and was not able to stop smiling. This is such a big check mark. It is such a real high five moment, I believe, for all of us, but for Black women in particular, because I often reference what Cicely Tyson said in a Gayle King interview some years back when she talked about Black folks being on the ladder, and that Black women are on that fourth rung, and that our knuckles and hands are continually trampled, but yet we still prevail. So I feel like this is that prevailing moment when we have to look up and see all other groups, all other communities, but here we are, because as we rise, we actually do rise other people with us. And on what was said about the Biden-Harris ticket, honestly, it's not his decision, right? These are the
in terms of what he's saying about it.
Right. Yeah, it's ultimately not his decision. And so this is what the people wanted. And we've seen great activity of people who definitely are pro-Kamala and definitely providing receipts around her history, notably Reese Colbert and Dr. Avis. So I believe that we have arrived at a moment that really is, you can't really stop us.
So in saying that, though, what does Joe Biden and Kamala Harris need to do in order to win the White House?
Well, I'll just kind of say this. Really, it is to get those unregistered voters registered so that they are actually activated and vote. Because really, people that are not going to vote for former Vice President Biden, with the addition of Senator Kamala Harris, that's kind of, you kind of put that off to the side. The 35 and under crowd, and really for those people who did not feel that they actually saw themselves involved in the body politic, pull them in even more. We saw Senator Kamala Harris do this when she was in South Carolina back in November of last year. And the focus of her campaign, presidential campaign, and really, to be honest, her legislation, and when you see policy-wise, was really centered on Black women. Black women have been a cornerstone of her campaign. So she knocked on doors, she went and talked to people, and then she talked about her experiences through the lens of a Black woman, because she comes into a place fully as a Black woman, fully as extraordinarily smart and intellectual person, fully as a person who has led an executive office and is a leader in the Senate. And so for somebody to make that type of connection, actually seeing that transcend over to those voters who don't feel like their voices are heard, to be able to have that kind of connection would really help what Biden and Harris did.
When you think about Senator Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, the many people are saying that it's a moderate move for the Democrats, and then there are others who are saying it's a radical left move, and that criticism comes from Republicans. To that argument, what do you say?
I say that they're both wrong. I say that she is to the left of Joe Biden, but she's not this radical crazy that the far right people try to paint her as. She is someone who, if you look at her record, yes, she is one of the most liberal senators in Congress. Absolutely. In fact, her voting record suggests she is to the left of an Elizabeth Warren, for example. She is one person who produces pieces of legislation after legislation after legislation that is meant to put more money in people's pockets in terms of dealing with this COVID economic crisis that we have right here, dealing with the health impacts that Black women in particular face as relates to, for example, maternal mortality and fibroids. I mean, she has been extremely productive in terms of what she produces, what she has produced as a senator, and has tried to move forward, including the anti-lynching bill. But I will also say that it's very interesting to me that those who are on the very far left completely act as if they are completely ignorant of that particular background and of her actual record. And to me, I begin to wonder, are you ignorant because you just don't want to know? Or are you ignorant because you just choose not to do your own homework? And so to those on the left, I would say take a look at her record, and it would be very different from the way she's been characterized. And to those on the right, I would say that I would expect them to mischaracterize her record. That's called politics, okay? And this is what she has to do, and what this whole ticket has to do is, so you have to push back on things that you know are lies, that you know are mischaracterization, and speak directly to the American people. When you do that, you will meet with success.
Politics. Gotta love it, right?
Exactly.
Ladies, I'd like you to stay with me. On the other side of the break, I'd like to talk to you about what Black women are facing in terms of this COVID-19 and the disruption it's had on the economy. How does that impact the lives of Black women in terms of dealing in business and moving forward and lifting their families up, their livelihoods up in the midst of the devastation that has been dealt to our economy? Back with more of my talk with Dr. Avis Jones DeWeaver and Erica Savage Wilson right after this. And welcome back. So I'm talking to Dr. Avis Jones-DeWeaver, political analyst, and she's joined by her good friend and colleague, Erica Savage Wilson of Savage Political Podcast. And I wanted to ask you, ladies, you know, when we look at what's happening across the landscape of America, we know that African Americans have been adversely affected by this COVID-19 pandemic at a disproportionate level. In addition to that, we've seen our economy be plundered. Now, nationally, we've seen that, but we've also seen it go down in the Black community. When I spoke to the President of the United States, I asked him about that very thing. And I asked him specifically about opportunity zones and how do you infuse more money or opportunities into the Black communities. And he went on to state that opportunity zones is a way of doing that. He wanted to do more for the Black community. From your perspective, while he is still being the President of the United States, what more can he do to put more cash infusion into banks, Black businesses, and just help Black communities grow?
I mean, particularly as we are looking specifically at this COVID crisis, I'm seeing some alarming statistics that suggest that up to half of Black businesses have already been obliterated as a result of the COVID economy. And so there needs to be more urgent help that they push through that would help business owners be able to save their businesses. And there needs to be more specific help put into the hands of everyday African Americans just to make sure that they can hang on. You know, it's amazing to me that, you know, you still have this back and forth around making sure that people have the unemployment that they need in order to survive until they can get back to work safely. There is no reason to be playing politics with that. I know he signed this executive order, which to me was political theater, right? Because he doesn't have that actual power. So make sure tell his boy Mitch McConnell to go ahead and sign the bill so that people can keep getting their $600 a month. Make sure that PPP is funded and specifically targeted. I would say if there's a way to target that to specific communities, and particularly to Black businesses, so that we can get back on our feet. We've already felt the ravages, for example, of the mortgage crisis, and we saw what that did to Black wealth. We don't need to lose half of our businesses as well. That would be completely devastating to the economic power of Black people.
And to your point, there have been some other studies that stated if we don't get this right for the African American community, we may see it totally eviscerated in terms of our businesses. Is it really that dire, Erica?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I can remember a couple of months ago when Dr. Avis, that piece that she's talking about from Black Enterprise came out around Black businesses losing up to half. I believe at that time it was 40 or 41% during this COVID crisis. I mean, and you're talking about that is in the span of just a few months. That, nationally, everybody has kind of been brought into, okay, we're actually in a pandemic here in the United States. And so when I start thinking about kind of what is happening with Senate Republicans, that the same week that the unemployment benefits were set to expire, that the 27th and the 28th of July, that week when you've got moratoriums that are going to expire on the 31st of July, but we have unemployment benefits that were going to expire at the end of this week, utility shut-off moratoriums that were going to expire, that we saw the Senate-led Republicans, particularly Senate Majority Leader McConnell, actually confirm 2 additional federal judges. So their total right now is sitting somewhere at 204, 205, while we have people that are hungry, the wealthiest nation in the world. We already had a hunger and food insecurity crisis, but we actually had folks who want to work and feed their families, hungry. The lines that we saw in Texas and all around the countries, those were not Photoshopped. Those were lines of people in their cars, packed in their cars, mind you. Don't know if everyone that car is family, or if there were neighbors, but now you're thinking about, oh my gosh, these people are close together in a car for hours waiting for food, Kelly. So, a better use of time and resources is ensuring that, listen, households have $3,000 a month, period. Because, and I say that specifically, I know that that's been brought forward, I believe, by Senator Kamala Harris, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. But when we think about what that would do for families that work 2 and 3 jobs just to be able to put together a couple thousand dollars a month to pay rent, when we think about people don't have at least $400 in the case of an emergency, when we think about Black people and people of color make up the lion's share of bodies that work in the service industry, right? And we all watch Business that Works. I have one playing in the background right now, and the gains that are continually talked about have nothing to do what people who are having to go to work every day are facing. So I would say immediately put $3,000 into the hands of people so that they can start taking care of what needs to be taken care of, that they are actually able to pay and meet some of their bills, and they're actually able to breathe and take precautionary measures to enable them to not only live and survive, but to hopefully be in a position where they'll be able to do a lot better after the pandemic, having been given this respite that everybody is such desperate need of.
That's very important, and there's a lot of pain out there in the Black community, and the pain is palpable, particularly like the food lines you're talking about. I've been out there in some of those food lines myself, and we'll be going to one this weekend, as a matter of fact, to see how they're continuing to help people. But even some food pantries are running dry, and it's now getting to a point. If you have a 3-car garage home, as one person told me, who was helping out a food bank in Montgomery County. Now, Avis and I talked about this the other day. Montgomery County, Maryland is one of the wealthiest districts in America, and yet you have well-to-do people not getting their PPP loans, and as a result of that, they're suffering. And to that regard, doesn't matter if they're Black or white, they're suffering because there's not enough money being circulated. So to your point, ladies, that is something that we have to continue to ask the White House to focus on, as well as Congress, particularly since they control the purse strings. What's at stake for America if we don't lift up all people, particularly the underserved and the marginalized and the forgotten, which predominantly would be Black, brown, and Native American people?
Well, everything. I mean, that is America. That is America. And, we are an important aspect of this culture, and we have been from the beginning. There would be no America if there were no us, and there will be no America if we weren't here, moving forward. And also, when you think about just the demography in terms of where this country is going, it is moving into a majority people of color nation. Yes. So do you really want to move in the future into a nation where the majority of the population is really just suffering in abject poverty? How are we going to compete in a global marketplace if that's the case? So I don't want us to create a system. And it seems like to me, honestly, I hate to be a conspiracy theorist, but this level of neglect that has been, and incompetence that has been exhibited around this entire COVID crisis, both in terms of the health effects and in terms of the economic effects, which we know both disproportionately impact communities of color and especially the Black community. It just makes me wonder, if the statistics around that were flipped, would we still see this level of neglect and incompetence? Is this an actual plan, right? And it concerns me because it's not news that we're having this demographic shift. Is this a desire to create an apartheid-like system in America, right? An economic apartheid-like system. And, I don't want to say it is, but I don't see the evidence that suggests to me that it's not.
Well, is there evidence then, and we'll save that for coming back after the break. I want to ask you a question of dovetailing with that. Is there evidence that we, the people, in the Black community can do something about it to make sure that we shore up our families and our people so that we can continue to contribute to America and make great accomplishments for our families economically, spiritually, physically, the whole nine. We'll be back with more of my discussion with Avis Jones de Weaver, Dr. Avis Jones de Weaver, and Erica Savage Wilson of the Savage Political Podcast right after the break. Welcome back. So we've been having a very stimulating conversation on the heels of an interview that I had with the President of the United States. We had a very brief time, and I was reminded by the President that we have known each other for a number of years. I've actually known Donald Trump before he became president, going back to the late 1980s. when he was a maverick business leader trying to change Manhattan. And I look at Manhattan today, I see how his vision has changed the landscape of a lot of real estate there. Nevertheless, he went into the presidency and he brings his own business acumen to the plan of being a president. And not that I agree with everything that he does, but some of his policies in terms of trying to help shore up Black businesses as well as HBCUs, that was something I talked to him about helping historically Black colleges and universities. I think that is so important. Uh, to some degree, his policies have been very effective in making sure that there's a permanent cash flow going into our proud historically Black colleges and universities. And as we know, Senator Kamala Harris is a graduate of Howard University. To that end, is there more that could be done for HBCUs?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, when we look at just here in the DMV with Larry Hogan and the funding of
Yeah.
Bowie State, Morgan State, we're talking about historically Black colleges. And that does not mean that they are, that only Black kids are resident there, right? We have people from different backgrounds and cultures that also do um, exercise their educational, they do actually go, they attend HBCUs rather, excuse me. And so he has, for a number of years, refused to fully fund HBCUs so that they can be in competition with universities that are in Maryland and in states adjacent as well. And so when we look at acts like that, when there is a real um, um, pullback from the executive level to make to allow HBCUs to actually function and perform at their maximum level, because it was in 2017 that we saw a real robust return to HBCUs from a lot of students because they really wanted to seek a more cultural experience, particularly in the era that we're in right now. And so understanding that there are more kids that are attending and have been attended HBCUs, and to understand that HBCUs, some of which are just not as competitive to PWIs, you have to wonder, what is the intention behind that, particularly when you look at a state, a community that is not just one background, it is made up of many different ethnicities and races. So the proper and the righteous funding of HBCUs is definitely at the top of the list, but not funding that is suitable for the person that will actually sign the check, but what is actually a formidable number for HBCUs to be able to compete and not have to constantly raise tuition rates or have more expensive tuition rates, but not have all of the accommodations that they could have if they were funded better.
Avis, I want to take a break and bring in another friend of yours, a professor at Quinnipiac University, to talk about how we move forward. I know that you have something to say about HBCUs as well. So Avis, if you could do that real quick, then we'll bring in Kalila Brown, who's the Dean of Political Science, professor at Quinnipiac University. Welcome to the program, Dean.
Thank you.
Good to have you. Before we come to you, I wanted to finish on HBCUs. Avis, your take on that. Are we doing enough from the White House to Congress to everybody getting engaged on helping our HBCUs? Because in that talent pool is a reservoir of wealth and I believe the potential of greatness as we've seen. And again, I mentioned that Senator Kamala Harris is a graduate of Howard University, and they're so proud, as they should be, that she has been given this historical assignment to try to become Vice President of the United States.
Right. I would just ditto everything that Erica just said. We need to do all of that and more in terms of funding these schools in a very fair way. But I also think that we need to focus on really how are they being impacted specifically by this COVID crisis. I think not enough attention is being paid to the fact that HBCUs are having to navigate this in a much more dire way. Not all of them had, for example, all of the capabilities that maybe other schools had in terms of being able to have the virtual classes that often many schools are automatically switching over to. They don't have anywhere near the endowments that most major PWIs have. And so any sort of disruption in in essence, what their revenue would be if by having students on campus puts a lot of these schools in peril. So whatever could happen to make sure that they get some emergency infusion in cash so that they can survive this COVID crisis, I think is absolutely necessary because, as you mentioned, it is a wonderful breeding ground for the African American population to be able to go to get a good quality education that sets them up for success in life, and to be, the nation is a winner because of that.
Avis and Erica, thank you. When we come back from the break, I want to talk to Dr. Kalila Brown. She's the Dean of Political Science there at Quinnipiac University. We'll be back with more after this. Welcome back to the program. So I've been talking to Dr. Avis Jones-Weaver as well as Erica Savage Wilson of Savage Politics Podcast. And joining me now, I called her Dean. I graduated her or promoted her to the Dean of Political Science. She is not. She is actually Dr. Kalila Brown, Dean, Political Science Professor of Quinnipiac University. Doctor, it's good of you to join us today and share your insights on, one, the naming of Senator Kamala Harris to run for vice president certainly is historic. What is your take on this?
I think about where we were as a nation 2 weeks ago, honoring the life of Congressman John Lewis, and that letter that he published right before he transitioned that really challenged all of us to figure out how we were going to make good trouble. And so to juxtapose that with next week being the 100th anniversary of white women gaining the ability to vote, the 55th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, it made it clear that all of us now have our marching orders. And so her announcement was so much more than just her as a person. It was about all of the women who have made it possible for her to emerge as that candidate, for all of the elders who never thought they would see that moment. That's what this is about. And the thing that I've been saying to people all along is criticize her record. That's what we should do. That's what we are required to do. But let's not get into silly conversations trying to police her identity, because the issues facing Black communities in this country right now are so critical that we can't afford those distractions.
And to your point, I think there's some noteworthy women who would be shouting for joy that this has happened. Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, Ida B. Wells, Fannie Lou Hamer. They long to see this kind of day, even Shirley Chisholm. From the Quinnipiac University, there's always the polling that goes on. What kind of polls will we see for the Biden-Harris ticket against the Trump-Pence ticket?
I think when we talk about the big issues facing our nation right now, you can't talk about issues without thinking about the pandemic of COVID and the epidemic of white racism in the United States, and how that is shaping so many public policy questions that are before the country. So some of that polling will ask people, what are the key issues that you're prioritizing as you go to the polls? Which candidates or which ticket do you trust to work in a way that furthers your interests? And sadly, in 2020, we still have to ask people, are you willing to vote for a woman into a position of power? Add to that a woman of color. And that's where we still are. And we're seeing, the thing that I think is so important here is that we also have to realize that that hesitancy isn't just about other communities. Some of that hesitancy is within Black communities themselves, and what it means to push through that and beyond that in order to get to the policy questions that are before us as voters.
Ladies, I want to thank you. Powerful statements, a very eye-opening dialogue with you. And I thought it was very important to have you on. We had planned for this about a week ago, and then the president, his people invited me over to talk to him. But I didn't want to lose sight of what you were bringing to the table. And now on the heels of all of this interview with the president of the United States, albeit it was brief,
We also have the announcement, the historical announcement of Senator Kamala Harris being named to the vice president nominee with the presumptive Democratic presidential nominee, Joe Biden. So much history, and yet so much work to do in these unprecedented times. Mm-hmm. And I just thought having Black women on to talk about what they're going through, because on many occasions, Black women have been defined as being the backbone of not just Black America, but America, with the great work that's been done through the years, so many years. So I wanted to have you on to weigh in on this. So let's have this conversation again. Let's keep lifting America upward and moving it forward. And that means doing it from the left, from the right, from the middle, from conservative to liberal, from Democrat to Republican. We can all agree to disagree, but still choose to live in harmony. And I thank you all. Dr. Kalila Brown Dean, Political Science Professor at Quinnipiac University, Erica Savage Wilson of Savage Politics Podcast, and Dr. Avis Jones DeWeaver. Thank you both. Thank you all three of you, rather, I should say, for being on this program.
Thank you, Kelly, and congratulations on the launch of Black News Channel.
Thank you for that. We have a lot of work to do, and certainly we want to represent all factors and all people, but when it comes to representing Black America, we want to speak truth illuminated. Thank you.
Thank you. Be well.
All right, we'll be back with more of my final word after this.
Welcome back. I want to thank my guests for appearing on tonight's program. I particularly want to express my gratitude. One more time, 3, 2. Welcome back. I want to thank all of the guests who appeared on tonight's program, and I particularly want to express my gratitude to the President of the United States, Donald Trump. Thank you for the interview that you've given us today here on the Black News Channel. Now, my final word. As we go through life, we must understand one thing in the United States, that we have to continue to work together. We have to continue to agree and disagree, yet still live in harmony. Because the bottom line is, every time you watch this program, hopefully you will leave feeling righted, ignited, and united to keep spreading not fear, not hate, but love, freedom, and peace. From the White House, I'm Kelly Wright. Good night. Just give it time, give it time. Come on, y'all. Get on board. Mankind won't survive if our hearts beat inside a hateful rhythm. You see, love isn't bought, but comes with a price of forgiveness, and we all bleed the same. Yeah. If you don't feel it now, just wait. It's coming on, the love train. Just give it time.